Welcome back to the RotoViz Fantasy Football Report. We're all together once again, and we have a special guest, Sackreligious. Always a pleasure to talk with you. We know your work from Legendary Upside and all kinds of other great stuff you do. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on, guys. Excited to be a part of the show tonight.
Just excited to have you on, man. We're coming in. This is kind of a fortuitous timing. Best ball regular season is coming to an end. I can finally stop checking on and consuming dangerous amounts of hopium for some of these fourth place teams or third place teams. I have the one thing I want to say is the sharp thing I did was I have a lot of Zach Charbonnet and a lot of Jordan Addison, and let's just not talk about those teams. I think they're all somewhere in the 7th to 11th range due to selections beyond my control. But yeah, I'm excited. Hasn't been the best of seasons for me, but I want to get your guys' take. How are we feeling as we are looking to wrap this up?
I mean, my teams that are advancing are pretty good teams. Like I have some really strong ones. My high stakes stuff is actually the stuff that's doing the best. So even in the seasons where I run bad, I run good. So that's cool. I think I'm going to end up advancing about 20% in high stakes. So we'll absolutely take that this year. Thanks to a heaping helping of Chase Brown. Got a good amount of Zach Charbonnet too, but the team I'm most excited for is a Vikings onslaught and a Seahawks onslaught. And then it just has like the nuts around those two teams. And when I say the nuts, obviously my team is not tainted by Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. Not the actual nuts, but like the nuts that are accessible to people that draft like us.
Yeah. So like, and I mean, Blair?
No, I was just laughing.
Oh no, I was just gonna say because like realistically, it gives you like natural leverage as you go into these, right? As we get into the playoffs, and like I mean, like the thing about the pod structure that really annoys me is when you open it up and you see it's you and like 11 other guys with like a 90% of the same person, and you're just like, this is the most annoying thing because like it doesn't matter what happened at that point, because then you're just like looking at like all the uniques, and it's like. All right, you're like a third of my uniques are on IR. Like it's like this is it. Like you're about to wash out. Mm-hmm. So that's actually pretty. It's good that you're able to advance. I mean, that's what we all appreciate in the off season, right? Like you want some level of natural, I don't know, diversification against everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let's not talk about my best ball teams. It'll only make me sad. So instead, let's talk about Kirk Cousins. That won't make me sad, right?
Well,
I mean, we have this homecoming game for Cousins going into Minnesota. He kind of puts up a dud. I guess the more interesting side of this game is the Vikings, but the Falcons are an offense that we had a lot of hope for coming into the season. I know I drafted a lot of Drake London. I still drafted Kyle Pitts.
Oh, yeah.
What do we think of this kind of passing offense? I don't know. Is there a future for Pitts in fantasy football?
Well, actually, and let me add on to that though. Like, do you think do you have a percentage chance in your head of the probability that Cousins is going to get benched down the line? So it's a 2-part question for you, Sackreligious. Kyle Pitts, what's his issue in life? And Kirk Cousins, what's his issue in life?
Yeah, so I'll start with the Kyle Pitts side because I'm still thinking about the Kirk Cousins benching. The Kyle Pitts question is much easier to answer, and it's that I've lost my last dollar on Kyle Pitts in fantasy. I don't think he's very good. He's not able to out-earn, Darnell Mooney for targets or Ray McLeod. Like when Ray McLeod is out here earning more targets than you, like we can comfortably say that it's over. And so I'm good on Kyle Pitts. I don't need to do that experiment again. And to me, like being willing to cut bait on guys like that who like I did that with Jerry Jeudy this year, and when I say cut bait on him, like because of Jerry Judy's price and because people that I respect their analysis were like, dude, this is way too cheap for Jerry Jeudy. It's like you're not wrong, but I'm not going to be overweight, so I had like 5% Jerry Jeudy. So
That's fine.
But like if Kyle Pitts goes anywhere close to where he went this year, like I'll squarely have 0%. But if he becomes a late round tight end, then yeah, if he's like in the Tyler Conklin range or something like that, then sure, I'll sprinkle in some Kyle Pitts. But like I think that I'm done deluding myself into thinking that he has this elite tight end upside. I just don't think that that's there. As far as benching Cousins, I mean, it's got to be north of the probability goes up every passing game, right? The closer and closer they get to the end of the season, the higher it gets. And obviously, it's also increasing the more losses that they tack on. Right now, I can pull up we've got some sims that we run over at Legendary Upside for the playoff best ball stuff, just so we can always be on top of.
Oh yeah, we could probably get into playoff best ball. I haven't thought about that just yet.
Yeah, I want to look at where the Falcons are now. I would assume that they are.
I think they're much lower.
Yeah.
I think
they're all the way down to below 33% to make the playoffs, and this is just based on the results of the games from today. We also have a component where we're measuring the relative strength of teams against each other. So we're going to be close to what Vegas has as the win probabilities for each week. So I would assume that the Falcons' relative strength is also going to go down after this loss. So whenever we've run sims right after a Sunday slate, you kind of know like where a ceiling or floor threshold is for a team, depending on if they won or lost and how strong the victory was. So yeah, I would assume that Atlanta is probably well below 30% here to actually make the playoffs. So I'd say Kirk Cousins' probability of getting benched is probably right about the same, right around 30%, and increases every week.
Yeah, so like the thing with the Falcons is, and this is the interesting part, they have like this like a pillow soft front out, right? Next week they're going to be in Oakland against the Raiders, who just lost their starting quarterback, was Aiden O'Connell. Can't get softer than that. Then they're going to be at home versus the Giants. They have a stiff test against the Commanders, and then they host the Panthers, right? So again, that's like a very much a 3-1, right? Like, and even then, to your point though, I don't know if that gets them into the playoffs though, right? So they're just thinking it from like a playoff basketball perspective. I don't know if I have the mental fortitude to do that, but like, would you be considering how, like, if you are thinking of any Falcons for playoff basketball, like, are you even bothering there?
No, I'm not touching a single Falcon. And with these really cheap teams, you basically should never draft them when their odds are low like this. Like, for example, Seattle, after the win today, we have it just about 58%, and it should go up because it was a relatively strong win against an opponent that was close to evenly matched with them. So just call them 60% or so. I'm not even drafting Seattle yet, because that means 40% of the time you click a Seattle player, your team's dead. And if you just walk through what happens, so let's fast forward 2 weeks. Seattle's won the last 2 games from here out, right? What happens to their price? Nothing. They're still available in the last round. No one thinks they're going to make the Super Bowl, right? So you gain almost nothing by taking them early, and you risk a team. So to me, it's really, really not worth it to accept that type of risk. The type of risk I'm more willing to accept is like in trying to predict who's going to get the bye. So I was going really heavy on Buffalo being the bye team after watching Kansas City. Just seemed like they were, they're destined to drop a game here. And Buffalo looked so strong. And then the Rams absolutely just shellacked them. And then, I mean, Josh Allen put up a valiant effort there to try and come back at the end of the game. But now Buffalo goes from the favorite to getting the bye to right now we've got them at around 30%. And that's prior to the outcome of the Chiefs game here. So it could go even lower.
Yeah, that was a tough one, right? Like, I mean, the game itself, highly entertaining. But on the back end, to your point, though, if you're building teams with the expectation of Buffalo having the bye,
Yeah, those ones
tricky.
don't hurt. They don't hurt quite as bad. I mean, they're like weaker teams. I've now watered them down because I've drafted fewer Bills than I needed to draft. I drafted a second quarterback. The ones that actually hurt are the ones where I played KC to not get the bye.
Oh, right. Yeah.
those are likely dead. So it's just something where if you're playing playoff best ball, you can kind of keep that in your head as like a way to manage your risk, where it's more aggressive to assume a team is getting the bye than it is to assume a team is not getting the bye, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense because you need everything to break right in the one end, right? Versus actually having some contingency on the other side. Legendary upside tools can definitely help you out there. RotoViz tools can help you out there. And you know what will help you out there? Not drafting Kyle Pitts will help you out there, right?
Well,
I think I've told the story multiple times, but this is the first year I've been in on Kyle Pitts, and the last year I'm ever going to be in on Kyle Pitts.
my one question about Pitts is like the only real way that I could see him like appreciating in value, or not even appreciating, but maybe even holding his value. Say he gets traded to someone like the Bengals. You know, like T. Higgins goes. We kind of seen what Mike Gesicki's been able to do when T. Higgins is out. Like
I
something like
would
that
think
happens.
Gesicki still will command the target. So
But I think a little more like prove. I don't even know if Gesicki signed for next year or not. I don't know if he was a 1 year or 2 year guy.
I believe he's a 1 year.
Yeah,
I think the 1 year, but they might if Higgins is gone, I think they'd bring him back.
Yeah, but that's like really the only way I could see Pitts like appreciating value, and it's kind of it's rough because, or not even appreciating, but more holding. But
good luck to those people then, man.
Yeah.
Like if Kyle Pitts beats me, he beats you.
Yeah.
Good luck. It only took you 6 years to get there.
Yeah. Well, I had somebody offered me in one of my FFPC Dynasty leagues, offered me a first, like, I don't know, a couple months ago. And I'm like, no, I'll just hold for the time being. And like, I had to go back. I looked through my emails today and make sure there wasn't like a team that's going to be like in the consolation ladder. But thankfully, it's a team that's in the playoffs with me. But I was just like, oh man, if this is a team that I could have got there first for like Pitts and, you know, possibly like a top 5-6 pick, I would have just been kicking myself right now.
Yeah. Joking asks, are we drafting assuming the Texans win the division? Colts are such a soft schedule to end it out. This is for playoff basketball.
Yeah, I mean, right now the probability of the Texans making the playoffs is 97%. The Colts are, the Colts are sub 20%. So yeah, I think you can pretty safely draft the Texans for playoff basketball. The problem with the Texans was early when the contest first came out, people were really, really steaming up the Texans, like much higher than they should have been going, given their probability to go to the Super Bowl. And so I just wasn't getting Texans because I wasn't going to take 3-4 turn Joe Mixon, Nico Collins. It's just not.
Well, why would you need to? They haven't returned anything this year.
Yeah, it's just because people see them and they're like, oh, these are really good fantasy players. The baffling thing about the playoff basketball market is the market is not even consistent in the way that it gets things wrong. Like for the Vikings have some very good fantasy players. You've got Justin Jefferson, you've got Aaron Jones, Jordan Addison, Sam Darnold. All those guys go extremely late. Vikings are actually a lock to make the playoffs, and they're 21% to make the conference championship, and that'll probably go up a little bit after their strength increases after the win today. And so people are over here poo-pooing the Vikings. You know, Justin Jefferson might go in the 5th round. Sometimes he goes as late as the 6th round. And, you know, people won't take the Vikings there, but you'll take the Texans instead. And the Texans have much lower. Texans are down below 15% to make the conference championship, and they go a lot earlier than the Vikings. And yeah, it's just the other one that people won't touch is Pittsburgh. I've been pounding the table for Pittsburgh over the last couple weeks. Even as the captain of the Russell Wilson haters fan club.
Yeah,
all of Pittsburgh's an incredible pick for playoff basketball. Now they're 30% to make the conference championship. Those odds are, I mean, they're better than Baltimore right now. Pittsburgh could even get a bye. Pittsburgh has about a 10% chance to get a bye. So and this is prior to Kansas City's outcome. If Kansas City wins, that'll go down, obviously. But I mean, Pittsburgh being in such a strong position to actually make the conference championship game and people just ignoring them, it is very confusing how the market decides to do things at playoff basketball.
It's because no one wants to believe in that, right? I'll be honest with you guys. So like one of my buddies over Thanksgiving told me how his in-laws came over, and like his kind of family came over, and the only thing they discussed football related was how Mike Tomlin is a bad coach, and he should be fired. That is the feeling in Pittsburgh.
With Pittsburgh, with Pittsburgh, you kind of understand that just because of well, I don't even know why, because they're playing great lately. But I mean, historically, they haven't been an offense you've wanted to.
No, but I mean, that's sort of the thing. It's funny though, right? Like, because like Tomlin is getting, I don't know how he's getting this out of Wilson with Arthur Smith, right? So like, I do feel like with this Kyle Pitts stuff, right? Arthur Smith is vindicated. All right, like you've got a second coaching regime that's showing up, and they're like, I don't, Scott Pitts guy, I don't know, man, like, right?
I don't know if I go that far, but
oh no, look at what Jonnu Smith is doing in Miami. He absolutely deserved to play ahead of Pitts. Maybe it's probably a bigger indictment on Pitts that he learned nothing by hanging out with Jonnu Smith, you know. But anyway, that's enough Pitts hate. You did bring up.
I wanted to ask about the market in these playoff best ball things. Like, what do you think is causing the Vikings to go so late? What's the rationale there?
I think that a lot of people just don't want to think the Vikings could make the Super Bowl, and really, I think like the way that they get things wrong, like the direction that things are wrong, almost like you can squint and see like how it makes sense to, it doesn't actually make sense, but how someone could rationalize it. Like the Texans, people could squint and say, but the Texans, they could make a run, and Joe Mixon's so good, and Nico's so good. And so like that's kind of how I see the Texans error happening in that direction. Mm-hmm. And then for the Vikings, I think people just are assigning like, hey, the Lions are so good. And even if it's not the Lions, it's surely the Eagles. And so it's hard for people to tell themselves a story about the Vikings getting there. And that's how you end up with two players, or two sets of two players. You have Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, and Nico Collins, Joe Mixon. Those are that's a pretty comparable 2v2, right? Yeah. And then you have one that has a higher probability, but it goes later, and you have one with a lower probability that goes earlier. It's really hard to reconcile that if you understand the game. You're like, what is happening here? And even further, like if you understand optionality and like what selecting a pick does to the rest of the player pool and what it opens up for you, the Vikings are incredible. You can take Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson as your last two picks. Hello, like this is great. Whereas if
Jordan Addison of the 3 touchdowns today, right?
You take the Texans, and then what are your last two picks that you're looking at? You're like, I guess I could take Dalton Schultz and surely Tank Dell will do something, right? Like,
do you really trust Tank? Well, Tank Dell will be out there blocking on like third and short, right? Like that's what he's going to be doing. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if they added like points per block yet in these playoff basketball leagues, but like that's sort of the thing, right? Is that like I feel like the Tank Dell error really occurred through people over-indexing on 6 games where he flashed really bright, where the Texans needed to throw heavily, and he got off junk yardage, and then he got hurt, and that was it. Right? Like, I mean, like, because Nico never got the same level of like respect or the bump, and to be fair, his pricing kind of reflected that he couldn't like a Tank Dell bump got, right? Like, and now you're looking at the difference, and it's like, like when Tank Dell had to do anything, even when it was him and Diggs, it was like neither of these guys are doing anything. Whereas, you needed Nico really was like the guy that opened up the offense. A guy who you did bring up, and I want to chat about him because he's on a show sheet. Justin Jefferson, 7 of 7 targets today. 132 yards and 2 scores. These are his first 2 touchdowns since week, I believe. First 2 touchdowns he scored in 7 weeks. So since week 7, been a while. Welcome back to the end zone. He also got out-targeted by Jordan Addison 12-7. It does feel like a lot of defenses have been sort of doubling up or tripling up on Justin Jefferson and daring the Vikings to beat them through their sundry players, which they're more than happy to do so. Do you think that this Justin Jefferson 2-touchdown game is going to impact his best playoff basketball price next year? And also, is Justin Jefferson kind of your 101 or in the running for your 101 next year? Also, Historical Anomalies asks, what was the song you played at the end of Stat Chasing?
At the end of Stat Chasing, we played a song written by Buck, who is he's the editor for all of Pete's videos. He does a bunch of stuff behind the scenes for Pete Deposit Kingdom, and he wrote a parody of "Wake Me Up When December Ends," and it was "Wake Me Up When Dehember Ends" about Derrick Henry burying all of our best ball teams. It was fantastic. If you didn't catch that episode of Stat Chasing, go literally just to listen to the song at the end. It's so good. So yeah, shout out to Buck, doing very fantastic work over there. To go back to Justin Jefferson, I mean, this spot definitely seemed like a really good Justin Jefferson spot. Pat was all over it in the walkthrough. I pushed back a little bit when we had our preview pod this week. I told Pat I wasn't certain that the Falcons' pass rush was really as bad as they look from a season-long aspect.
They weren't.
They flashed last week.
They played well today.
Yeah, and they started the game extremely strong. They get 2 sacks right away. And then, I don't know if you guys saw this, but on the play where Jordan Addison has the long bomb, the first bomb that he catches, the pass rush gets to Darnold. In fact,
it gets to Darnold. Darnold just made a vertical play. Yeah,
they hit his arm as he throws. And then the ball is super underthrown, but that ended up working out just fine. And so then I messaged Pat right after I had said something like, looks like, the Falcons did figure out their pass rush. She's like, yeah, that's a really good shout. And then Darnold goes on to just chuck 5 touchdowns, absolutely nuke. So,
I mean, part of it was also that Cousins didn't exactly do a good job in protecting the football and putting the offense in spot, right? You can't really continue. The pass rush, I believe, played the best it's played in a while, and it's been a while. You know what I mean? I think you were right. It's just the results weren't there.
Yeah, their secondary really gave it up, and I can't remember where I saw this, but I read a stat that the Falcons are pretty high in just playing single high. And when I saw that, it did kind of stick out to me as a spot where if Jefferson doesn't get there, you probably get Addison getting there if the Falcons are moving, just because so much of Addison's stuff is coming deep down the field. If you look at where his targets are coming, I mean, he's such a fun receiver. I couldn't believe that we got him as cheap as we did during best ball this summer.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's just not going to matter anyway. Because
I'm not getting paid out on this. I'm not getting paid out on my 35% Jordan Addison.
Yeah, but I feel great. Feel great about the process.
The process that got me to Addison, I'm just like, oh, my Sklansky bucks. Can't wait to cash this shit in.
Yeah, it turns out a Bolitnikoff winner that is running across from the best wide receiver in all of football is kind of a good bet. It's
kind of a good bet, yeah.
When he first got drafted, I said, you could really draw parallels to the Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster situation where Brown opened up so much and Juju just had this prolific season. Obviously, a pretty big difference in the profiles between Juju and Jordan Addison there, where really I felt like Addison's profile coming out, he could do more than just be this deep ball merchant, right? He looks more complete than that. Not a all around superstar crush you at every level, but he looked like a pretty solid receiver to me anyway. And it does seem like the Vikings are very interested in just making him a deep ball merchant, but he's doing it quite successfully.
Yeah, it's Joe King says the QB change scared me off. I don't know, so I think I do feel like with Addison's price this offseason, it was just way too cheap for what you could get out of it, right? You could either chase your T Higgins, and I understand why the pricing differential is there, but you shouldn't be getting T Higgins at the 2-3 turn and then getting Jordan Addison at a 6-7 turn. right? Like it's like that's kind of who you're betting on, right? If you assume you're parallel to like it's Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, you shouldn't have this wide gulf between Higgins and Addison, right? And so I don't know. Maybe I'm thinking about it like it's far too much of a fish. But but would a fish have 35% Addison on fifth place teams?
Where do you think Addison goes next year?
He's probably like a solid fifth round type of guy, right? Like,
really?
Easily.
You think higher? Or?
I'm thinking higher.
I think he could be. The biggest issue with it depends on how many. The real issue here is it depends on how many running backs we see actually start making that jump up, right? Because we have been trying to figure out guys who are really going to get a big old bump. I feel like. Hang on, let me. I'll pull up the underdog.
I think the other thing about basketball that's going to be interesting next year is it is still growing, and it does feel like there's a whole different subset of people that really got into it this year. Like the number of people who maxed Best Ball Mania this year compared to last year is substantially more. I think it's something like 1,100 this year compared to 700 last year. I've got the numbers somewhere. I can pull them up, but it was a substantial increase. And some of the people that maxed, I mean, they're not listening to this podcast, so I don't have to worry about offending them, are really bad. Like when you look through the portfolio statistics that you could look through for people, not just the individual player stands that they had, which I don't think tells you all that much, except dude, why do you have 90%, Quentin Johnston, or why do you have,
what?
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of stuff like that.
But you just built your entire portfolio out of Quentin Johnson. What are you doing here?
Well, the thing is, there's a couple dozen people that are building the entire plane out of a handful of picks. It's not that they have a bunch of different teams; they have one team with a few one-offs, and that's the whole 150 set. And then probably throughout the rest of their portfolio too. It's the number of players that they are overlapping is north of 8. They have 8 mutual players on every team, which is what's happening here? And it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of, what do you win when you win? And I feel like those people are conflating I know that I'm right on these things and I'm going to take a heavy stand, and therefore when I'm right, I win the whole thing. And it's really not how it works. You probably can get the same result with a fourth of the concentration that you're doing. If you look at my portfolio diversification, I'm really, really undiversified relative to a lot of people. I'm in the mid 20th percentile. So I take big stands, but relative to the people who are the least diversified, I'm tenfold more diversified than them. And that's kind of the subset that I'm talking about, where there's a way to go super hard. I feel a lot of the RotoViz guys are really good at this, making a concentrated stand in their portfolios without building the whole plane around. The whole plane isn't these guys. It's yes, we're going to hammer the crap out of Chase Brown. We're going to have a ton of Chase Brown, but my whole portfolio doesn't live and die by Chase Brown because I've got a lot of other guys that I like too. Right. Yeah. And that's really you need to find that fine line to where you're better off just placing season long prop bets on guys. And that crowd of people has found best ball now. And I think that a lot of them did have success this year because they were the people that were more likely to draft Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley and Alvin Kamara. And so they're sitting there with these really good looking advance rates. And I think it's just going to encourage that behavior from that subset of people more. And the best thing is you don't really have to concern yourself about gosh, I shouldn't say anything to educate the fish, or otherwise I'm going to make them sharper. They think you're the biggest idiot in the room, bud. Nothing you say is going to change their mind.
Yeah.
An advance rate over here. What do I do to not be like this guy? It's so really I think we're in a pretty fascinating spot where we'll probably have the most polarized player pool. And I mean drafters next year that we've seen in all of basketball, where like zero RB people were not so. I mean, they were contrarian for the last couple of years. This year, they were the least contrarian. But I feel like next year you're going to have a pretty polarized subset of drafters. It's going to lead to some really interesting dynamics. I wouldn't be surprised at all if we see the highest standard deviation on ADPs that we've seen in a long time next year. And I think that changes up some things. Most notably, like the way that people handle the late rounds, I think is going to be pretty important in the way that these landscapes change. But yeah, it's definitely some fun stuff to think through. I've got some really interesting ideas for things I want to test and some process stuff I want to build out before next year.
Yeah, so like this, I think we talked about this a little bit before the show started, but this, or at least at the top of the show, where this does feel a lot like that Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, the third round running backs, like the 2016-2017 season, where Mike Pierce debuted the idea of hyper fragile, where you take 3 running backs that you know are going to touch the ball 350%, like 350 times that season, and then you just draft a bunch of tight ends, wide receivers, like quarterbacks, right? And back when this is back when draft existed, before we really had very many like tournaments, right? Fast forward now, right? I remember that really upset the actual landscape, the market landscape, for like 3 years. It took a very long time for us to get back to like where you started looking at a draft board like what I'm showing on the screen here, where you've got a ton of very good wide receivers in the first 3 rounds, right? In the first 4 rounds, right? And so I don't know what, like, I think we've talked about this ad nauseum, but like, I'd love to get your take on this, Zach. So like, a guy like Saquon Barkley, right? Middle of the second round here, RB6 and underdog. Like, he is what? Very solidly a top 3 pick next year, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't think he probably just goes 101.
101, right? Like, he becomes
he'd have to really fail at the end of the season to like leave a bad taste in people's mouths for
But he's definitely a first rounder. Like,
yeah, he absolutely will be.
But like, and even then, what's the standard deviation? 101 through 104?
Probably the guys usually we don't see very high standard deviation in the beginning of the first round.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I wouldn't expect him to really go beyond like 102. Most of the time, like even with Christian McCaffrey
right here, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Even with Christian McCaffrey this year, like it was basically like if he didn't go 101, he went 102. And then sometimes you were in a room where he went 103 and you were like, wow, crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. And it's not, it didn't matter at the end of the day because he gets you nothing, right? He got you nothing.
Oh, by the way, I am advancing a Christian McCaffrey and Jonathan Brooks team right now in the 555. It also has Taysom Hill on it, so super fun.
It's just the most painful IR room you can get. But when you look at this, right? So you got your CMCs, right? Bijan's probably going to go a little bit higher. Barkley is going to go higher. Jahmyr Gibbs is going to go higher. Henry is going to go higher. Kyron, right? Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, right? Like, look at the guys who you were getting in the 5th, 6th, 7th, right? So it's not going to look like this, is what we're trying to say here, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly anticipate more of like a return to where we saw there being like an actual dead zone, like the 3rd and 4th round. I think a lot of these like 3rd and 4th round receivers are the ones where they kind of fall down a little bit. And that's why I said Addison in the 5th instead of like the 3rd and 4th. Like for us, we would be like, yeah, Addison's a 3rd round pick. What are you talking about? But for what the market is going to do, he's probably going to get pushed down a little bit. I also would expect like we'll probably finally see some separation from the elite tight ends where Bowers and McBride are like pretty squarely, I would say like 2-3 turn picks at the absolute latest on Underdog.
Yeah.
In FFPC, it's probably like 101.
101, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think that you get a couple of those tight ends that move up a little higher. You get some running backs that move up. You probably still the quarterbacks like the Josh Allen, the Jalen Hurts. I wouldn't be surprised if Jaden Daniels sneaks in there, and then you have like
Jaden Daniels. We talked about Lamar.
Yeah, I think those 4, along with the tight ends, and then some running backs, kind of move up, and you really end up with the first couple rounds are mostly just elite wide receivers and elite running backs, And then your third round is kind of like, all right, everybody take a breath. And then we'll have skill position players come back. And then I think that's where you end up with starting to see something that we haven't seen in a long time, where we'll get a good amount of standard deviation on those picks in that section, where you're going to have like a, 2 paths diverging in a wood, where you've got the people who want to take those running backs and the people who want to take those receivers. And one of the big things for next year is recognizing what type of room that you're in, because if you're in a room where everyone's going to take all those receivers, then you do need to be aware of like kind of a second wave wide receiver avalanche happening there, where you just get totally buried. But if you're in a room where people are going to take the running backs, it becomes that kind of dance of picking through the dead zone to find those guys that you think do have profiles that are worth passing on one of these receivers, and knowing that your room is going to overvalue running backs. So because of the dichotomy between the two different ways I expect people to draft next year starting to become a lot more clear, like you'll have these kind of factions or camps of how people want to draft, there's going to be a lot more room to actually exploit based on reading your draft room, which I think is good. I think that's really good for the game, just with the advent of tools and how the game is starting to evolve. I think you really need something where the actual drafter can, insert a little bit more of their own skill by observing what's going on in the room and reading the room. Of course, the tools will evolve to be able to do that too. But
the thing is that this is sort of what I found at least to be true for me this year, and I hope it'll hold true for me next season. Is I'm finding the most success in my drafts that were all done pre-NFL draft versus the ones that were done post. Now, in fairness and in full transparency, I did take a very long break, just by virtue of the fact that I was like completely underwater at work for a very long time, and like when I was able to dig myself out of it, it was like 2 months or like a full 8 to 10 weeks of my life had like gone by, and I looked around and I'm like, holy cow, I've missed the best parts of drafting season. And so like I do think that you need to have a plan going in for the pre NFL drafts. Like I love those. Those are so fun, right? Because some people just don't build the right teams. They don't take full advantage of the fact that you now have 2 extra roster spots in underdog. That you need to know how to attack that spot. You need to understand what you're doing that's going to be different from the 20-man roster to an 18-man roster, right? And what I noticed in those drafts is just like people were drafting these like teams that were just you knew were going to die, right? So it felt good. And then you also have to again, to the point is that you got to take like stances on players. Here's a good comment. Someone who we did want to probably chat about would be Zach Charbonnet. Raphael says Charbonnet and KW3 are going to have 20 plus TDs like Gibbs and Montgomery next year. I want to get your take on that, Zach, because it feels like every time we see Charbonnet sort of getting the full workload in the backfield, he's just putting together just phenomenal spike weeks, right? Like just phenomenal games. So do you think that there's going to be an upcoming philosophical coaching shift in their usage?
I don't think so, because it's not like he's been a secret to them. Like they know what he is and what they have, right? I mean, maybe you could say that he earns more work, but I do think they really like Kenneth Walker. And really, I think this game was more of an anomaly than anything. We've had a couple down games for Kenneth Walker, but it could have just as easily been him if he's in this one. The thing that I do think is interesting about the Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker and Gibbs and Montgomery specifically is the second running backs of each of those teams were, in my opinion, wildly mispriced this year. The Charbonnet one, I think most of the people that kind of think like us and draft like us were all over Charbonnet. I felt kind of on an island with the David Montgomery thing, where every time we had a rankings call at Legendary Upside, I was pounding the table for David Montgomery, saying that he was going too low, that we weren't baking in contingent upside for a profile that certainly has contingent upside, simply because he goes early, where people are happy to think about contingent upside and bake it in later. Like for years, Alexander Madison was like perpetually, eighth, ninth round. Like Alexander Madison, he lives here because the contingent upside is insane, right? Last year, you get Eli Mitchell. He lives in like the 10th round because the contingent upside is insane. And so people understand contingent upside, but it's it's kind of just like the thing I was talking about with playoff basketball, where the market's wrong in different ways on this, which is pretty baffling. It's like they understand a concept, but then they fail to apply it, and they fail to apply it in multiple directions, which is wild to me. But that is, I guess, what happens when you're dealing with a large group of people. It's not like it's just one hive mind where someone's deciding this, right? Mm-hmm. So you're getting all of these behaviors where someone anchors something to the wrong thing, and then it just gets stuck there and people reinforce it. But like with these earlier guys who do have contingent upside, so 2 running backs in a very strong backfield, for example, let's just say that the Bucs backfield, just for clarity purposes, let's pretend that Rashad White's no longer there next year. Obviously he's going to be, but let's just say it's just Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker, also because this is much more fun fan fiction. But let's say it's Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker, and Bucky's going in the 4th, 5th round in that kind of like new wave dead zone era, and Sean Tucker's going in like the 130s, 140s. Mm-hmm. That's one where, again, Sean Tucker's probably just going a lot too late, because it's a backfield where both these guys should have standalone value, and Sean Tucker's standalone value is probably where he's being priced, which I felt was the same thing with Charbonnet, where, hey, this guy's standalone value is where he's being priced. And then you get the same thing with Montgomery. Yeah, the standalone value is where he's being priced, but we're not considering the contingent upside. And it's like we only have the ability to hold this in our head in one way. We can only think of contingent value when the guy is actually a backup. And they're like, well, with the contingent value for this guy, if he got the job, think about how crazy Braylon Allen would be.
Yeah.
And so merging the two of like, he has this standalone value and then he has this contingent upside, where, I mean, we've seen for David Montgomery too, if Gibbs goes down, like you can get these 30-point monster weeks out of Montgomery where he just gets this absurd workload. And the other thing that people, I feel like, do incorrectly is they say, yeah, well, that's not going to happen for the whole season. You don't get that. It's like, that doesn't matter. I just need it to happen. Like, if it happens in week 16 and I get week 16 and 17 out of it, like that's what you're playing for with the contingent upside.
Or you get a team that's like cuspy and it gets you there. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you get the unique player through, right? Like that's what he still got, like it still is a value, right? Like at the end of the day, like it's not like, yeah, but like what do you need? Well, you also still need to get there. you can't limp into these with 3% of advancing teams that are dead like week 15. Like what fun is that? Right? Like at that point, thanks for playing, right? Like you're below EV, you're not going to break even, and then now you're just sort of dying on the vine, right? Like the David Montgomery stuff is interesting because I feel like the more you do projections and you spend a lot of time tweaking that, that's where you actually start to visualize why the ranks or what their values could be and why they might be wrong, right? Like the more time you actually spend tweaking season-long projections, and you're like, holy cow, like this is what makes sense. This is what doesn't make sense. Like, this is a very big, like his intrinsic valuation doesn't match what the market is saying it is, right? Like you've essentially uncovered someone whose implied value is ostensibly much higher than it should be, which is nice. It's tough because like Montgomery is one of those players I feel like is like a proto Jamal Williams, wherein like everybody wanted to like he doesn't fit the type of profile that like you would be chasing, right? Like takes away all like most of the work he gets is like happens to be through the tackles kind of stuff, parallels to like LeGarrette Blount, the other guy Jamal Williams, all these other guys, right? So it's like it's fun, right? Like if you're able to like keep that in mind going forward, it's just the ability to figure out like who are the guys you want to take your lumps with, I guess. And that's sort of like a one of the things is like a Josh Jacobs. Like I hate, like I'm not necessarily like the biggest Josh Jacobs fan, and I regret not like thinking through it the way you guys did. I think Sam Sherman is someone who like found interesting ways to build teams around Jacobs, and I kind of regret not doing that. Do you have any teams like that?
Yeah, let me pull up how much Jacobs I have, because I do have some. He wasn't someone that I was taking none of. The only guys that I really took none of was Saquon Barkley. That was like of all the running backs, the one I had none of was Saquon. And this is the thing that like I feel like a lot of people who do fantasy football analysis and do best ball analysis really are not willing to say this. Like they want to just be like, you're right, I was super wrong on Saquon, like that was a big L. But I kind of think that the process on Saquon wasn't all that bad. I think that the actual miss here is we thought that the tail outcome that needed to happen 3%, 5% of the time for him to like truly bury you at his cost. Mm-hmm. And the real number, like the tail was a little fatter than we thought. It's probably like 7%. We fucked up the kurtosis. I'm sorry. Everyone fucks up the kurtosis. But like that's the difference. And so because we're observing an outcome that's like probably happens 5 to 7% of the time, now it just feels so much more real and so inevitable. But like people forget, he wasn't a sure thing to be this good, right? Like he certainly could have been washed. He also could have been this good and just not ran this good. Like he could have gotten stopped on all these breakaway runs. He could have gotten that's touchdowns. Like, but the other thing is too, for people who treat it like it was so inevitable, like, oh my gosh, how did you guys not draft Saquon Barkley behind an incredible best situation of his career, behind this insane offensive line? If you're telling me that this outcome is the one that you were predicting when you were drafting Saquon Barkley, show me all your max limit bets on him to set the single season rushing record. Like, show me all your max limit. Like, show me that you're a millionaire now, because you didn't actually believe this. You didn't. Like, either you if you did believe it and you're not a millionaire right now, you either don't live somewhere where sports betting is legal, and even still, if you had that amount of conviction in it, like, brother, I'm taking a road trip. Like my house is on this. If I truly thought like Saquon Barkley's like 10% to break the single season rushing record, I'm retired right now. So like, if you're not retired right now, but you're saying like I was so smart for drafting Saquon Barkley, there's something incongruous here. You either weren't as confident as you say you were, right? Which is most likely the answer, or you fundamentally misunderstood what you were betting on and how that range of outcomes looks. If you're saying like, it's so likely to happen. And so I'm happy to say like, I don't think the process was all that bad. I definitely think there was a mistake in the process and that we underestimated those tail outcomes. And like in this specific run out, like it's burying the fuck out of me. And that's okay.
But we're paying for it, right? Like we are paying for it. Right. Yeah. And like, but like on the flip side, think about everybody else who got like look at Raphael. I drafted CMC at 101. Yeah. I think I got 28% CMC at 101 because I got a lot of 101s, luckily. That's what those teams are doing. It's just like, guess how those teams are doing. Let's just take a wild guess, right? Like when you take CMC 101, you're like, all right, now I'm done. I'm like, I'm wrapped up at running back. I'll see you around. Like, and right. And so you don't, right. And so you don't find out like I remember having these discussions, which was like, hey, like the CMC rushing line, this is before we even knew he was hurt, is like really weirdly low. Right. It was like he only needed to like he needed like 63 or 64 rushing yards a game over a 17 week season to get there, whatever that was. And I was like, this seems oddly low. And we were like having the discussion about like what is like the season long like max limit best that you could put on him. And it's like, well, one, you're not gonna get a lot down on that, right? For him to go over. And then two, running back overs is also kind of risky a little bit, right? Like and so and because like these are the outcomes that happen, right? And like to your point though, is that like it felt like what we're getting hosed by is the fact that a lot of these is like messing up like the left side of the tail, not necessarily on like just Saquon and Henry, but like all these guys, right? Like just messing up like exactly where they were. And to be fair, I think some of that had to do with like the wide receiver avalanche, but also I think the wide receiver avalanche stuff is also partially because wide receiver kind of sucks, man. Like it really sucks. There's a lot of players that are just not good, right? Like, and you just don't want to be left holding the bag with 4th round Amari Cooper as your wide receiver 1, right? Like what are we doing here, right? Or You went all in on a Christian Kirk explosion. What are we doing here, right?
Well, yeah.
Right? Like so like you're expecting Deontay Johnson to be a wide receiver too for most of the season. Great run out. Great, like right? Like it's just although I did want to before we do this about wide receivers, Deebo Samuel got 2 or 3 targets for 22 yards and he rushed 5 times for 13 yards. I don't know what happened, but where does Juwan Jennings go next year? What happened to Deebo Samuel? And like, what are we doing with the Niners' receiving group next season?
I mean, Ricky Pearsall becomes pretty interesting next year, right? You have to think that from a organizational standpoint, like they really, really want Ricky Pearsall to become a thing because the Deebo, like, I'm not ready to be like Deebo's done. It's totally over. But he's under contract. He's gonna be there. I would, if you made me guess as to what happened to Deebo this season, it's just all the injuries adding up with a particularly brutal case of pneumonia. Apparently, like you just and you got to remember this is such a grueling, brutal gladiator sport that, like, dude, if you're not feeling 100%, like that can be the difference between you being an absolute superstar and you just looking like a guy off the street. And so I think that it would be a little hasty to say that Deebo's done. You'll certainly get a large discount on him. But guess what? Deebo's already done this. This is the second cycle of Deebo's career, right? Where he had the huge nuke season that he did nothing. And so I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if Deebo continues to put up these very sporadic spike weeks. Man, Juwan Jennings is making me question how good Brandon Ayuk is, which seems like it seems blasphemous because I know that Ayuk grades out incredibly well as a wide receiver, but I also have a prior that is making me come back to, and I was super wrong on this, to be crystal clear. I'm just talking through my bias. When Ayuk came out as a prospect, I did not like him. I thought he was very good.
No, I think he was very good. No.
And so then when he became good, I was like, it very much conflicted with my worldview, right? And so now that I have something that could tell me, actually, you were right, Brandon Ayuk wasn't all that good. He's a system receiver. Juwan Jennings is the man. It's fun.
Yeah, and that system is probably like it probably falls apart when he's away from San Francisco. And they paid him and they try to prioritize him too. Look, it's not to be clear, we're not making fun of the fact that he got hurt and he deserves his money. We're making fun of the fact that people were drafting him in the first 2 rounds. I have almost no Brandon Ayuk and I have a lot of Deebo, and I'm not getting paid out there either.
I had a ton of Brandon Ayuk because I thought that the contract stuff was all overblown. I thought he was going to come back.
Oh yeah, because of I think I was just bigger on Deebo because I was just nah, this I either wanted Deebo or Kittle. I knew I was going to be light on Ayuk. Didn't matter. Just didn't matter. The
49ers as a whole, the 49ers as a whole just sunk you. I mean, Juwan Jennings was really the only good pick on the board. Purdy was also pretty good. He's, the injuries have really slowed him down here these last couple of weeks, but for his cost, he was pretty fantastic. I mean, another year for QBs in the window though. You draft Joe Burrow, you draft Brock Purdy, you're absolutely smashing Jaden Daniels. You're smashing right now.
That's what I was gonna ask you about, right? I feel like there's a way to go with the elite quarterbacks, and the path I think feels, at least to me, because I'm a donkey, it just feels thinner than just sticking with the quarterbacks going in the window.
I'm perpetually light on elite. I don't think there's ever been a season where I was heavy on elite quarterback. This is the year I had the most. And let me pull up my portfolio.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at mine as well. Give me one quick sec. I'm just gonna look at what I've got going.
So my most owned quarterback by entry fee was Drake May at 37.8%. Actually, I had a lot of Hurts because Hurts would go. I would get Hurts in the 4th or 5th round sometimes on DraftKings. And that was incredible. So I hammered Hurts. But other than that, I'm looking down. I had a decent amount of Joe Burrow. I had almost 10%
I have a decent amount of Joe Burrow,
But then for other like elite quarterbacks, Lamar, who is a quarterback that I loved, I was making it a point to go out of my way to draft way more Lamar than I typically would have. I ended with 7%. Lamar.
Okay, I'm at like 9% Lamar.
Yeah, 4% Mahomes. Really, just because
I have like 3% Mahomes.
Yeah, and then
I have a lot of T-Law though.
That's almost no Josh Allen. Yeah, 5% Josh Allen by drafts, but only 3% by entry fees. So I was getting him in like the lower stake stuff. But yeah, the elite quarterback, to me, the price is just typically not great, especially these last 2 seasons. Prior to the last 2 seasons, there were spots you could hammer.
It was what you needed.
Yeah,
because it was just like why wait half a round for someone who's going to score like 300 fewer, like 150 fewer points.
Yeah, when you could get Jalen Hurts in the 6th round, that was that's a spot to jump on. So I would anticipate that the elite quarterbacks being like very prohibitively priced is kind of here to stay, though, especially for that like first group of them. And then the thing that you have to navigate is like finding the Trevor Lawrence / CJ Stroud of the next year. Like, who's that pocket passer that we're gonna like steam up and put just an absurd premium on for the sake of ceiling? When like really what you need to think through is almost all of these pocket passers are kind of at the mercy of, like, of course they're the ones driving the bus, but they are at the mercy of how good their team is. Because you see like Baker Mayfield is incredible pick, right? He's absolutely smashing, and it's the Bucs have a functional offense. They're allowing him to pass, and he's doing well. Like, so it's these really expensive pocket passers. Like, you get Trevor Lawrence and CJ Stroud in the back-to-back years are the 2 that keep coming to mind because they're like kind of the first pocket passer off the bus. And it's just, they have to do so much to be close to those elite guys. They're going not that far behind, that systemically it feels like an okay spot to say, I'm just going to be underweight here, even if I really like the guy, which I do believe. I ended up at 6% Stroud this year, and I was like, when Sean was like, Stroud could set the world on fire, he's going to throw for 9,000 yards and 80 touchdowns. I was like, too light a projection. I'm for 10,000, dude. And I still only ended up at 6%.
The most tilting thing I think this entire season has been watching the Texans try and make the entire plane out of Joe Mixon. And you're just like, oh my God, this is not only is it like ugly, it's so annoying because like you have like, this is back when they had 3 functional good wide receivers in Nico, Diggs, and Tank Dell, and you're run, pass, run, pass, and you're like, huh.
Yeah, it's just harmful to the development of Stroud too.
And also just like the Texans and just in general.
Yes,
like this could have been a team, right? Like it could have.
I still have hope because they've been more pass heavy with Nico coming back, and they're going into the bye. And we've actually seen a lot of teams around the league start to skew a little bit more towards the pass here as the season is winding down, which is interesting. I do think that there's still a chance for the Texans to be really fun and exciting down the stretch. But shout out to Ben Gretsch, had an incredible write-up about play sequencing and how it was impacting the Texans a couple weeks ago in stealing signals. That was one of my favorite things that I've read all year. And it was it was just so on the nose with the Texans that it was, I just got even more frustrated at them after reading.
It's annoying. In the exact opposite vein, though, you got the Rams, right? With Matthew Stafford and like kind of like, I mean, we were talking a little bit about this, but I really wanted to talk about the shootout today and where are we at with like Apuka Nacua? Just because like Nacua was already going incredibly high, but it feels like he is going to be retaining his value, right? Like it feels like from like all the elite wide receivers going early, Tyreek Hill is going to see the biggest decline, right? I'm just trying to talk through this mentally, like as we go through this. Like AJ Brown might see a decline, Tyreek Hill sees a decline, and like Puka should be a top 5 wide receiver locked in first round next year, right?
100%. Yeah, Puka. Basically, as long as Matt Stafford is still playing, Puka is a top 5, if not top 3 wide receiver in the league.
Yeah.
The thing that last year I had a couple of friends with Puka who had him in dynasty leagues, and they're like, should I hang on to Puka or should I sell him? It's like, you sell him the year before you think Matt Stafford's going to retire. Because if Stafford, my goodness, look at what Stafford did to Kenny Golladay. Exhibit A is all you need to know for what kind of impact Matt Stafford has on receivers. And I'm not saying that Puka is Kenny Golladay, but what I am saying is there is likely a chasm between what Matt Stafford will do for his fantasy value and what whoever his next quarterback will do for his fantasy value. And so if you're in a dynasty with Puka, you got to be 1 year ahead of the Stafford retirement. So it doesn't seem like next year would be a Stafford retirement, but who knows? Just be reading those tea leaves.
Right.
He is a kingmaker, man, like Stafford, because he does know where his bread is buttered and he knows how to get the ball to his guys. Speaking of, from a playoff basketball perspective, how are you playing any of these guys in that division, the NFC West?
Right now, just kind of like what I said earlier, the teams with low playoff probability I'm just not touching because their cost doesn't change. And so the whole NFC West is basically untouchable right now. You've got Seattle leading the way with the Rams right behind them. 49ers, for all intents and purposes, are out. Their playoff odds did increase a tiny bit with a win today, but we've got them at 7% right now. So they're not really live. But yeah, so the way I would, if you want something actionable for but Sack, I really want to draft Rams, or I really want to draft Seahawks, then don't draft right now. Just wait, or draft fewer teams right now, because you can draft really good teams. Now, I know a lot of people like to draft early because they want to get these combos that are unattainable. And what I'll tell you is the combos that are unattainable now, there will also be combos that are unattainable later, that simply because the Seahawks and Rams aren't in the player pool right now effectively for the vast majority of people. And if they are in your player pool, you're costing yourself so much by doing that it's not. Same thing with the Bucks, right? They're not really in the player pool for people. I do see people draft Bucks occasionally, and they're probably now safe enough to where I'll click them. But that's kind of the, that's the line of demarcation there. If you're below really 60% or I'd even go hey, if you're below 80% to make the playoffs, I just don't need to mess around with you, because it's unlike the Bills last year where they were 13% to make the playoffs at one point very early in the life cycle of playoff basketball, where if they did make the playoffs, their price was going to be insane. They were going to actually go all the way to the top.
Yeah.
That was such a unique situation. The 49ers would have been a similar thing if CMC doesn't get hurt and they actually make the playoffs. Right. So I was drafting 49ers in the way too early stuff, even though their playoff odds weren't great, because of that phenomenon of, hey, when they make, they're all first 5 rounds. The absolute latest, you're going to have Jawan Jennings sitting in the 5th round, bud.
So 100%.
You can't wait. But for Seattle or the Rams or Tampa Bay, those are all ones you just sit on. One that we have is kind of low right now is Denver at just about 75%. I think that they're right on the line of they're safe enough for me to be willing to draft them. Now, the weird thing about Denver is there's only 2 real draftable players, and it's Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton. But that's kind of an incredible ace to have up your sleeve in playoff basketball when something gets blown up on you. And you're like, oh, shit, I need a quarterback to get me through the bye week. I need a wide receiver to get me through the bye week. And to have such a clean, absolutely uncontested stack is pretty beautiful in playoff basketball. Having a plan B is important, but having a plan B that is not going to get blown up to where you have to go to plan C is extra important. So I do, for me, when I'm using an AFC team as my team to help me push through the bye, I'm more willing to push the quarterback there. So if I've set up a Chargers thing, or I've set up a Texans thing where those teams they're locks to make the playoffs, they've got some solid fantasy pieces. I could take a Ladd McConkey, I could take Nico Collins, Joe Mixon. I don't need to take those quarterbacks really at all. unless I've already got my second AFC team closed off. Like, but if I'm playing like Lions plus another strong NFC team, and most of my team is built out of that, and then I've got just like sprinkles of an AFC team that's going to go to the Super Bowl, then I'm happy to use those kind of fail-safe AFC teams as my fallback, and then you can just feel comfortable pushing that quarterback. You don't have to cost yourself a good skill position player that you might be able to get in the 6th, 7th, 8th round because you're taking a quarterback when you know that you can just do the Bo Nix thing, in the worst case scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And yes, that's a guy who we can go on about this because like it feels like Bo Nix might be a guy who you want to target in the window next year because he was actually him, JJ McCarthy, and Drake May. I think were 3 of my most owned quarterbacks this season. Not getting paid out in JJ McCarthy and watching Darnold like go off, kind of painful. Nix, not too bad. Got some eighth place teams where I can take a look and say I can have the visions of a plan. Drake May similarly. I feel like those guys are going to solidly be in the window next year.
I'd be surprised if May is that early.
You think
I
so?
hope he's not that early.
I hope he's not that early. Man.
I can't wait to lose money drafting Patriots team stacks again. That was
No. That's I mean it's fine. You just take Ramondre and Drake May and Hunter Henry and we just run the whole thing back again like next year, right? Like where's that gonna happen?
The most painful thing is that in all the years of Best Ball Mania, I've got like a model that looks at, hey, what did well this year? Like what are some things that you can analyze to say these strategies are consistently good for building the types of teams that you want, like teams that will score a lot of points and maybe at the end of the season, especially the ability to just build like these super teams. And the thing, I mean, other than like every single year of Best Ball Mania, the model really loves if you smash wide receiver, if you spent a ton of wide receiver draft capital, like that's a duh. But other than that, the one that popped up that like every single year, this was the skeleton key to getting the teams that everyone would be envious of in the playoffs is doing full onslaught team stacks of teams that were going really, really late with quarterback and everyone, and where their running back was going before their pass catchers. So if you had a running back with relatively early or comparatively to the rest of the offense, early draft capital, and then you had a team that was going super late, essentially what the market is then identifying is this is a running back where the workload's known. So we have a pretty decent floor here, right? The ceiling might be not great because it's on a crappy team, right? Like it's the Patriots, right? Or even the Broncos this year are a good example. Like backs are going late because the team's bad. And then you get all the pass catchers late. And that kind of team level bet where you get, if the team is good, this running back not only is paying off their value, they're an absolute nuke. And then also, if the team is good, all these guys that I drafted from rounds 15 through 18, even if they're not incredible, right? If the Patriots are good, now their receivers are probably like 12th through 14 round values. But that's an enormous win. And so
it's a big win, because you can because that's the move. That's what you're looking for on the margins. You're not spending a lot of capital on them.
Right. And so the model target is trying to predict total fantasy points on a roster. Yeah. And so those teams, that subset of teams, when you filter for those, had the highest variance in the amount of points that they would be projected for. So their range of outcomes is the widest, which means you're drafting a ton of 12th place teams and a ton of first place teams. And so full well knowing that, I went in this year and I hammered Drake May, I hammered Bo Nix, I hammered Bryce Young. I mean, I've got 37% Drake May. I've got a pretty healthy amount of Bo Nix. Let's see,
I have
9% Bo Nix. Just all these guys that were going late, I've got a good bag on. But.
Do you find that building teams like that makes it harder to get a lot of wide receiver draft capital?
No, because basically what I end up doing then is the entire like early and mid rounds are just wide receivers and running backs. Yeah. And then I'm maybe hitting a quarterback in the window, and then I'm hitting just whatever quarterback falls to me late, and then I'm throwing on that third one and building out a full team stack.
The three QB is very overpowered if you know how to use it. And I actually fell upon this. Oh man, during Justin Herbert's no fancy model, I fell on this during like Justin Herbert's rookie season, just straight up by accident, because Tyrod Taylor was going as like a 14th round pick, and I was very confident no one had a clue what they were doing with this. Everyone was like very like it, because it was the same narrative which you just saw with like the year before with like Deshaun Watson before he came in and like nuked worlds, right? And so it's like, look, everyone's saying for a fact you've got Tyrod Taylor is going to be the starter, right? But this, like, my thought presupposes is, what if he's not? What if it's Justin Herbert? What if that's who I need in the final round? So every time I got locked out of like a quarterback or like I just got completely pushed out, I was like, all right, we're back to Justin Herbert. And man, I would have genuinely had done ridiculously well. I had the worst spot luck that season. Like every I was like this close to making the finals with like 5 or 6 different Justin Herbert teams. And every pod that I went through had like someone who just beat me by like 0.1 to like 0.03 points. Like just the most tilting of like tilt fests you could imagine. And you know what? That happens. But like when it happens for you, when you see that and experience it, you're like, there might be something here that the market is just not possible to pick up on. Like you were saying, that's what your model is able to quantify something that I was able to fall into backwards because I had just one too many beers, while drafting. So, yeah, exactly. Joking's right. I don't even have any 2024 teams to tilt about. I think I have like an advance rate of 8% on DK. I think maybe it's like 23% on like underdog. I don't think they're making it past next week, man. I'm just hoping that all my season long unders on DJ Hawkinson and all the various players will fix my bankroll. At least won't be that bad of a loss, but it'll be a loss.
Yeah, I could sure use a bink to make me right with the bankroll pain I'm going to take this year.
It's just the pain. He had nothing. I have nothing left in there.
There's always playoff basketball, though.
I know, right? We're just running back. But
we've been going a long time, kind of off the show sheet, but that's all right. Anything else we want to talk about before we get out of here? You did mention Jonathan Brooks earlier, and he's someone who I kind of do want to discuss in the context of his value going into next year, it looks like, because this injury did not look good. I think we'll probably wait for more details before we really speculate on what that means for the rest of 2024, but kind of assuming we're not going to see a lot from him the rest of the season. Where are you looking to get him next year, if at all? I mean, losing a rookie season is usually pretty bad for these guys. Although we have seen, I don't know, like Jameson Williams lost his rookie year and came out. Obviously, that's a different position, but now he looks pretty good.
And now, he also killed Sam Laporta, man. Like, what the hell?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, these rookie running backs who don't play at all pretty much their rookie year is usually a negative signal. So I don't really know what to do with Jonathan Brooks.
I'm getting shades of Kendra Miller already. I'm experiencing PTSD.
Oh man, hey, he had a touchdown today.
Hey, he had a touchdown today, though.
He did.
Mm-hmm. My 12th place teams are still in 12th place.
In our chat for the guys that work on the season-long best ball rankings over at Leg Up, after the Brooks injury today, Kyle Dvorchak said, we have the opportunity to do the funniest thing of all time next year with respect to Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard again. Because we had a huge fade on Chuba Hubbard and a very large bull stance on Jonathan Brooks. And again, it's, the silver lining to how poorly the results of this ceiling went for us is it really highlighted a systemic flaw in the way that we do rankings, in that we just were underrepresenting certain tail outcomes too much, and not like, I feel like the vast majority of people who make best ball rankings or any kind of fantasy rankings are really, really too like median projection brained, or like not even median projection brained, but they're one number projection brained, right? And that is so not the way to do it. It's like so harmful to think that way. And we do a pretty good job of not being that way, but I think we still like caught in our process, like, and here's where you get buried. Like when you fall into that too much one number brained way to evaluate a player, like this is what happens and this is what the pain looks like. And this year was just a perfect storm of that pain. And so I think, at least for me and for our process for ranking players, it really helped to illuminate, like, this is why you might consider doing things in this different way, which I'm really excited about the way that we've discussed, kind of making some adjustments to our process for next year that I think will really help us capture, because it's not like we didn't sit here over the summer and say, Jonathan Brooks is 100% going to be the starting running back by week 6 and he's going to nuke and there's no other thing that could happen. Like, that's not what we thought. We thought, hey, there's some chance that he starts the season healthy. There's some chance he's on the pup and it takes 4 weeks. There's some chance that they really ramp him up slow and you don't even really get full on Jonathan Brooks till like week 10. Yeah. I would certainly say that we would have probably said what happened this year was like a bottom 5% outcome, you know? Right. But the way that our brains work on really small probability events is your human brain is just so quick to dismiss that as to like, well, 5%, that never happens. So that's zero. We don't count that. And you really do need to consider what happens when those low probability events occur, just like when the good ones occur for Saquon Barkley, like what does happen? And so then it just helps you recognize, like, and I've talked about this before too, which is the most frustrating thing, is that taking a fade on a player is the most aggressive thing you can do in best ball. Like having a full 0% is so much more aggressive than being like 30% on a guy. Now, when you get into like having 100% on a guy, it inherently means that you're going to have 0% on a bunch of guys. And so that's why it becomes that much more aggressive. It's not just that you had all of this one player, it's that you hard faded all these other players. And that's a really, really aggressive thing to do from what actually happens in all of these different scenarios that can play out. And so to kind of bring it back to Brooks and his value next year, I really think taking kind of a broader like range of outcomes type approach to him is really important. He's probably, this is disgusting, but like in dynasty leagues, he's probably a really good buy, right? Because in the range you have this guy who is an incredible talent, right? Like we think he's a very strong running back. And injuring your ACL twice in, less than a year, basically on the same knee is pretty bad. But also like, look at J.K. Dobbins. Like J.K. Dobbins came back from like the most gruesome series of knee injuries and then added some Achilles as a treat. He's like, let's just top it off with a sprinkling of Achilles. And then all of a sudden J.K. Dobbins is back. And like, of course, he's not the J.K. Dobbins of years past, but he definitely looks good enough to where like
he's still pretty good.
Yeah, he was a value in fantasy this year. Sure. And with Brooks, he's so young, so you've got that going for him. He is, supposed to be a good athlete. We obviously didn't get the testing with the knee injury this year. So in that same way that we missed on Brooks this year for not doing a better job at baking in the low probability outcomes that we knew existed, we just got too confident in kind of the median outcomes. I think you need to do the same thing for Dynasty and think, well, if I'm getting him for pennies on the dollar, like, yes, I bottom out that roster spot a bunch of the time and it just goes to zero. But when I win something pretty phenomenal. I mean, the other thing in Dynasty too is like, I think it probably pretty heavily depends on your team. And like, if bottoming out that roster spot really sets you back, then it just might not be worth the risk. That's the interesting thing about Dynasty. I do not have enough time to do Dynasty in the way that I would like to play Dynasty anymore. So I'm down to just one Dino league now. But like it does feel like though, like the Dynasty evaluation
is like that has become like more important than ever, because that's where the value is in baseball right now, right? Like you need to have like an idea of what's going on with these guys. You don't necessarily need to play in the leagues. You just need to understand what you're going to be doing with them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of, we're like still a little bit a ways away from this fully getting to where DFS has gotten. But for a while in DFS, the biggest edge was ownership, projecting what the field's going to do, because at the very beginning, it was projections. No one had projections. So if you had any projection that was remotely good, you were going to smash. Then projections became widely available. And so then it became ownership. And then now as DFS has evolved more and more, it's, well, now you need projections are out there. They're very good. They're very accurate. So what you actually need to have a big edge in DFS now is you need projections that are different than what's out there. You need to be originating your own. You can be a little less accurate as long as you're different, but you need to find things that are close to the right answer in the same, the same degree of error that the publicly available projections are, but they just need to be different. And so we're starting to get there with best ball, where there's still a big gap. I would say like roster construction is kind of analogous to how ownership was, and like that informs roster construction in DFS, right? And so we still have a long ways to go there, where, like I talked about, you've got the same people who are like the couple dozen people that are drafting like 80% of 6 dudes, and that's just your whole portfolio. Like, those people are also screwing up their roster construction pretty spectacularly. Surprise, surprise. But outside of that, you've got a pretty big chunk of the market now that's drafting on pretty good projections. But there's still room. We're not at like the final frontier where DFS was like, oh, the projections are insane. I think we're at like first wave DFS projection quality for best ball. Like, we have projections now, but I don't think that they're anywhere near as good as we would say DFS projections are now relative to where DFS projections were. And so I think that the easiest, like the lowest hanging fruit, is solve that problem of how you should be projecting and treating ranges of outcomes for players in best ball better than how people are currently doing it. Yeah. And that's what I'm working on this offseason. So I'm pretty excited.
That's a tough one, right? Because like, we're talking about a 17-game season of a game that's highly calamitous, right? Like, massive changes can happen. Daily is, DFS is played on a weekly basis, so you can adjust to like stuff like Juwan Jennings out of nowhere, Ricky Pearsall getting shot, right? Like, you know how to take these guys out of your player pools, and you can readjust the target shares, right? Like, I think to some degree, to your point, is like understanding how the ranges of outcomes from each player would work, and that's the hard. It's the hard part.
What I think people are going to see when we get, if we pretend that everything goes well and we step through the door of the next stage of projections for best ball and the next way to handle rankings, I think people are going to be pretty surprised as to how what a big stance actually looks like if you're playing well. I really think that we're probably going to see, like, dude, anything, if you're playing like and again, when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about playing with the intention of profit, right? Like, you're not just playing for entertainment. You're playing to optimize for profit, and you're doing it in the way where you accept the least amount of risk while still having, the goal of profit, right? I think that we'll be pretty surprised to see like how flat you should be in most places. And it really is probably going to come down to something more like, 20% is a really big stand on a guy. And then like you basically fade no one except for the people that are really, really mispriced. Like, there will be a couple people where you just go zero on them because they're just a straight up bad. Like, I didn't feel bad about taking 0% Nick Chubb this year, because when you get Nick Chubb back, like, your literal nut outcome is 20 carries, 0 targets, and you're probably dealing with a guy who's going to have a severe decline in efficiency because this is his second catastrophic knee injury, third pretty bad knee. Like, if any one of the 3 major knee injuries Nick Chubb has had happened to me, I would never walk right again, And so when your ceiling is like, yeah, 20 touches is the literal nut for me, and they're gonna be like 4 a carry. It's like
Yeah.
on a bad team that's
good,
just not
you
going
know?
to see the end zone very much. Yeah.
Yes. So like every
You know
once
you're
in a
getting
while,
a PD
you'll get those spots where it's like, no, I don't need to draft Jamal Williams on the Saints this year because just no. But like,
Right.
I think
Yeah.
fades will be much fewer and farther between, and I think big stances by people that start to subscribe to this type of strategy will become less and less. I don't think that you'll end up with fewer stands. You'll just have a lot of your stands be smaller. So like
Hmm.
I have a lot of stands in my portfolio this year. Unfortunately, just the way that I did it, I was really, really aggressive on a bunch of them. I got 3 people over 30%, and I have like 10, 11, 12 over 20%. And I think in hindsight and trying to frame it through this new way that I think is going to be more correct to approach the game, I think like you could probably have 20 guys at 20%, but you probably shouldn't ever really be getting to like north of 30%. I mean, maybe like Brock Bowers was an example of like a guy you should have like 30% of, just because when you think through it, like you probably could have assigned this actual outcome that's happening for Brock Bowers as like I probably would have said this is like a 95th percentile outcome, but like that's also probably wrong, right? Like seeing how good he
Yeah.
is, and how bad the circumstances that he's in,
Yeah.
probably like maybe an 80th percentile Brock Bowers outcome. So like, what is the 95th percentile Brock Bowers outcome? Is the guy literally going for 2,000 yards? Like, because that feels like it wouldn't even be that weird.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
Right.
like,
Yeah.
so knowing that like pretend you were magical though, and you could see the true range of Brock Bowers, like, yeah, then you're probably taking like 50% of the dude. You know, so being better at identifying those ranges, and then being better at, I mean, just being better at identifying those ranges will naturally make you have less of a player, because so many guys go to 0. You know,
Yeah.
like that's the
Oh,
other
yeah.
thing. You just, when guys go to 0, they really, really harm you. And so you really just need like, what are the equivalent bets to this player that are going in this range
Yeah.
that don't make me sacrifice so much on this individual team? Like,
Yeah.
did I like Zach Charbonnet over, Jalen Wright? Yeah, I liked him a lot more than Jalen Wright. But like,
Yeah.
I should probably mix in a little Jalen Wright here, because his contingent upside is still good. His standalone value is probably a lot worse, but I got 60% Charbonnet or something.
Right,
And so
right.
he goes to 0 every once in a while. And so you just don't want to expose yourself to that. And it's more true the better you think you are as a player. Like the better the better you think your process is, the less and less you should be trying to push the edge on an individual player to an extreme. Like you certainly can push your edge on player evaluation. That's one of the things I'm most jealous of with, like Sean is so good at finding some of these players where it's like, I mean, like I was confident in Chase Brown too. I was confident in Brock Bowers too, but I don't have 50% Brock Bowers, and so being able to have that degree of confidence in your player evaluations is awesome. But I do think that for me personally, it's going to be a lot more along the lines of like flattening things out, and having a lot more stands, but having them be less extreme.
Yeah, I mean, all kind of it is. I don't know. It is contingent upon, like, to your point, though, a little bit on like. Yeah, I think I might actually be with you, where I might need to flatten out my stances as well, versus where I'm going with it, or at least being as extreme.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you can still draft good teams with players if you can draft a good team with your second favorite player, that's kind of the way I would frame it. Like, do you have a second favorite player you'd pick here? Like, sure, I really liked, I liked Puka Nacua over AJ Brown, but I can still draft a team I really like with AJ Brown,
Right. Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah. For me, again, I think one of the things is, and I think a lot of people should try doing this, is go look at some of your teams that might have a chance at making it through this week, and see if the player above you, how many zeros they're going to be eating, because it does hurt you. To your point, Zach, like zeros is what's going to really ruin you, because there are like today, like, and this season in particular, if you have a chance to do it, especially today, with 6 teams on bye, right before we head into like the best ball playoffs, there are going to be teams dropping out of their like advancing spots because they're eating zeros at tight end, eating zeros at quarterback, eating zeros at running back, eating zeros at wideout. And so, you know, if you have a chance to do it, I would say do it.
Very cool. This has been even more than we bargained for. A master class and
a master class
best
and
ball
this thought
construction.
process.
This was awesome.
Yeah. This should become an evergreen, just like a life lessons pod that's just run. Lessons learned.
Definitely. Man, we'd love to get you back to do like more playoff stuff because I know you're big in the playoff best ball.
We could probably do like a FF
FFPC
report. We could do an FF report, stat chasing, like crossover when we get into real best ball. We could draft a few teams.
Yeah,
everyone.
That'd be fun. I'm deep in the playoff best ball weeds right now. It's literally taking all of the time that I have to work on fantasy football right now is pretty much being spent on playoff best ball. So
yeah, we'll draft a few of these live, like after like, you know, the teams have all set, like all the edges are done, we're all completely maxed out. But that's some fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
The time, it's been the time, man. Like 1.5 hours.
We kept you a long time,
yeah.
Anything else we need to mention before we actually do leave? You can catch all of Sackreligious' stuff at Legendary Upside. He's doing amazing work over there.
And stat chasing.
Yes. Awesome stuff. But yeah, that'll do it for us tonight. Thanks so much for joining us, for hanging out, and we'll talk to you next time.